What a well-behaved audience. Look at that. The hush just fell over the room so peacefully. It is absolutely superb to be here today. I am Bridi Rice. You're in my hands. I'm the CEO of the Development Intelligence Lab. So it's my job to say welcome to this extraordinary panel discussion today on donor competition, influence and aid. I'm sure we have no idea what this might be about. But by virtue of the giggles in the room, I think that that's probably not the case. And certainly the three extraordinary people that you're about to hear from today have a lot of ideas. Most importantly, I know a lot of you have ideas here in the room. I can see people that we have all managed to work with, debate with, have these sorts of discussions about aid, influence, transactionalism and everything in between, over a wine, over a tea, and many new faces who want to learn from our speakers here today as well. So we're going to get on with the job. I've got three people. I'm going to introduce them one by one, then hand over to them. Two of our extraordinary people, one of whom you can see, are joining us remotely. So let me introduce Martin Davies. Martin is in Port Moresby at the moment. He's the guy you can see behind me. Martin, there is a whole host of people. It's almost a packed house here in the Western Theatre. Martin is Professor of Economics at Washington and Lee University. He's also a visiting fellow here at the Development Policy Centre at ANU. He is best known for his expertise in economic development and in particular in resource-rich countries, and he's got a specific focus on Papua New Guinea. Now, Martin's key provocation today is, I love this, insight emerges through careful analysis and sustained application. So Martin is going to propose to you a high-level model for how to understand aid and influence. So you'll hear from Martin first, but let me introduce our other two speakers before handing over. Our second speaker is Ghulam Dastgir Khan. He goes by the name GD. So GD is originally from Afghanistan. He's an assistant professor at Hiroshima University, and that's where he's dialing in from today. Now, GD is best known for his focus on how development policies actually affect people's lives and certainly their well-being as well. So he uses really high impact evaluation methods to generate evidence that can guide policy making. So the project that he's presenting this year at AAC 2025 is something that is asking whether or not information about foreign aid can shape public attitudes in highly sensitive territorial conflicts. Now, his key provocation is it can shape attitudes, and we're looking forward to hearing why today. And then after GD, we'll hear from Mark Moran. So Mark is the former chair of development effectiveness at UQ, in case you can't tell. He's in real life beside me here today. He's now working freelance, but still affiliated with UQ, also with the Development Policy Centre here at ANU. And I did ask Mark what was something specific about him, and he had the most wonderful phrase. He said, "I'm an unusual civil engineer with a PhD in social science." So he's definitely a unicorn on the panel today. But he is best known for his work in remote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, including the PNG Australia borderland between the Torres Strait and South Fly of Western Province in PNG. And Mark's key provocation, which I get the sense is behind this whole panel, is that development has long been effective at achieving influence because of its impact. But the way that it is being instrumentalised in hidden ways today is undermining that development impact, which will ultimately also undermine its influence. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Martin. Our speakers have promised to be well behaved and speak to time. They haven't, I've just put that on them right now. But they have been given up to 15 minutes each. I'm very jealous I don't have Cam's bell. So Martin and GD, I'm going to just interrupt you at about the 12-minute mark. Oh, you're in trouble. I can see Izzy down the front is finding me the bell. Right, at 12 minutes, I'm going to ring the bell. You will need to finish up at 15. So that we can turn over to this extraordinary group to ask you questions. So Martin, over to you. The time starts now.
Yes, I just wanted to say thanks to the organisers for the invitation to speak, and thanks everyone for coming along today, and thanks for the nice invitation, Bridi. So I'm going to talk today about strategic competition in foreign aid. So this kind of this has been going. I've been working on this for about a year, although I've done very little on it for the most recent sort of 6 or 8 months, apart from the last couple of weeks. And it came as sort of inspired by my time in spending time in PNG and watching the sort of dance between the development partners here, the different countries. I put a mathematical model together just because that's the way I tend to think about things. And I think it does give some insight into the sort of exchanges and the interactions between countries. So just to start, we think about foreign aid. Oh, and Bridi, could I just ask too, you're going to give me a warning at 3 to go, but could you also give me a warning at 1 to go? It's not just about development. It's a tool of geopolitical influence. And, donors are seeking to shape the policies, alliances, and international behavior of their recipients, right? And there's a long literature on this, actually, and this word influence comes up repeatedly, although not specifically very well defined. But I won't, given the time limitations, I'm not going to talk too much about the literature. But the way I'm thinking about influence is that it's like a stock. And it builds over time, and the way that it builds is by delivering aid to a country, that generates influence, and that persists. That influence can persist over time. So that's the sort of essence of the modelling approach. So what is influence? And I'll just mention this very quickly. It's influence captures donors' ability to shape political, economic, and strategic alignment of a recipient country through sustained aid engagement. That's my definition. So I'll just continue on giving time limitations. So essentially, it is a very simple model. Although this equation might look difficult. All it's saying is that we think about I influence, how that changes over time. Well, it's dependent upon how much aid we give. And it's also dependent upon the rate of decay. So influence also decays over time. Maybe, roads or buildings wear out, or, there's regime change and the politicians forget about, what you did, or, people die, people move on, etc. So that's the sort of idea. So you can think about that really like a bathtub. You've got the influence is the stock in the bath. You've got aid flows coming in, that generates influence. And then you've got this sort of depreciation, the loss of influence over time as it sort of depreciates for various reasons. So it doesn't last forever. The influence doesn't last forever. So to keep a positive amount of influence, to keep water in the bath, you need to keep spending aid, because that influence, the influence that aid generates, does depreciate over time. So that's the sort of essence of this equation. And we can think about this parameter K as the sort of influence that's generated by each dollar of spending. So if I spend $1 in aid and it's a good project, I get K units of influence. And then the parameter alpha represents the rate of decay, how quickly that influence decays. So we're just thinking in this case about a one donor country. So there's no, in this simple case, just to introduce the ideas, it's like the bathtub. The water is rising with aid, building influence, and also falling as the influence decays over time. Now, I'm not going to go into the maths, but we do get some nice expressions here which really help us to see what's going on. So we can see that the level of influence, I'll just go through this quickly, this expression is equal to the square of the aid effectiveness, how many units of aid your aid dollar buys, how good your project is essentially in generating influence. And then it also depends upon, on the bottom, how fast this alpha term, how fast the depreciation is. So if the aid depreciates very quickly, that alpha is high. That's going to reduce the sort of steady state level of aid. And then we also have these other parameters, rho, which is the patience of the donor. So we think about Australia as being a very patient donor. It's been engaged in the Pacific for a long period of time, no sign of that ever changing. And also gamma, which is the what we call the shadow cost, or the political and fiscal cost of aid. And when we compare countries like Australia and China, for example, we might think that in Australia, the political cost of aid is much higher. You have to convince an electorate, whereas in China, that's less the case. So that parameter can differ between countries. So, what we have is aid is generated. We start from day zero, the day the first Australian aid program in the Pacific started, or in Papua New Guinea, for example, started. Aid builds over time, and eventually we achieve a steady state where the flow in and the flow out are balanced. That's the the steady state that we've been talking about. Now, what I'm going to do is I want to really get at the interaction between two countries. So we're going to have Australia and China. I'm building a two-country model, and the dynamic situation becomes very complicated when we do this. It's quite a complex mathematical problem, but it gives very nice results. It gives very intuitive results. And what I'm proposing in some sense in this with this framework is that it is a way for a donor to measure the effectiveness of their aid program or the effectiveness of a particular project even. And I guess part of the reason I got into this was, I was thinking about the NRL, the Australian government, DFAT, funding an NRL team in PNG. That was sort of what got me thinking about in this way. So anyway, the idea is that these two countries, they're both spending aid with the objective of increasing their influence, and they're in a battle with each other. And we can think about they each have a bathtub, like the bathtubs we just saw, and they've got the flow of water going in. That's the aid lifting the influence up. They've also got the depreciation, right? The plug hole, the sort of water going down because the current projects depreciate over time. They become less influential. But in addition now, because they're competing with each other, we can think there's an additional plug hole in the bath, right? So if China has a very effective aid program in Papua New Guinea, that can diminish the influence of Australia and vice versa. So they have a strategic battle, a dynamic battle that is ongoing over time. So that's the nature of this game. Now, again, no need to go, given time limitations, to go too deeply into the model, but we have the same sort of parameters. We have the efficiency of aid, how much influence each dollar of aid buys, this parameter K. We also have how quickly your aid, the influence decays over time. And then we also now have these competition terms, which reflect the impact of my influence on your influence. So if this parameter, we'll think about this parameter here to start, just the Australian one, phi A times IA, that tells me, given Australia's influence IA, this parameter phi A tells me how effective my influence is at diminishing the Chinese influence. So in a sense, how quickly my influence pushes Chinese influence down the plug hole in the bathtub, or we can think vice versa for China as well. And that's these two terms here. So that's the strategic game that's going on. The fact that these parameters exist causes the countries to engage in a strategic game over time. Now, again, not going to do the maths too much, but what I'm going to show you again is the sort of steady state. We have the steady state aid level and the steady state influence level, and it looks similar to the one country case, slightly more complicated denominator. But again, it depends on aid effectiveness. It depends on how patient you are, this rho parameter, and also on the how quickly the influence depreciates, alpha, and the cost, the shadow cost, or the cost of the aid. So it looks similar. Now, what I want to do is I want to go through. There's two results I want to talk about first, all right, that come out of this and that actually reflect reality. The first is that in this equilibrium, in this steady state equilibrium, when there are these two competing donors, they're overall collectively going to give more aid than if there was just one donor. So the existence of competition lifts the amount of aid that the recipient countries will receive. And I think there's good evidence, if we look at the Pacific aid map, there's actually good evidence of that. When China entered, the total level of aid increased. So that's one result that comes out. And the other is that, just quickly, this phi parameter, this parameter which measures the intensity of the strategic interaction, how much my influence can diminish yours, that the higher that is, right? So the more you are able to diminish your rival's influence, the harder each country will compete. So that also is good for aid. If countries are competing harder through delivering aid projects to get influence, to keep their influence up, that actually means that the recipient countries are getting more aid. That's another interesting result. So again, given time limitations, what will we say? I think I'll just go on to the asymmetric case. So this is the case where how do we if we can change our parameters, which we have some control over, right? If we can change our parameters, or if the parameters of the models change, the K, the alpha, the phi, and the gamma, if they change, how does that influence the outcome in the model? So first one. if the cost to Australia of giving aid, the sort of shadow cost, if the, say, for example, the political cost of giving aid goes up, the electorate becomes less keen on aid. So it's more costly, you know, for a government from a political sense to give aid. If that goes up, the effect of that is it reduces the influence for Australia in steady state, in the final state, or the steady state, and it increases the influence for China, all right, in steady state. So, for example, given that you would think that China has a lower shadow cost of aid, that benefits it. It's likely to have a higher steady state level of aid than Australia. Now, if efficiency goes up, if your efficiency, the efficiency of your project in generating influence goes up. So, for example, maybe the NRL project is one that is particularly successful at building influence. That has the effect of increasing Australia's steady state in the NRL case, let's think, and reducing China's. So that's the sort of part of the competition is you want to between the countries is you want to have projects that are efficient at building influence for any given dollar amount. Now, if decay goes up, if the rate at which your projects depreciate, or I should say the rate at which your influence depreciates goes up, that will reduce Australia's steady state level of influence and increase China's. And finally, in this rivalry, if we can manage to become more effective at strategic competition against the Chinese, the Australians can. So Thai A goes up, the parameter which through which Australian influence impacts Chinese influence. That increases Australia's steady state influence and reduces China's steady state influence. So this is the sort of dynamic. This is the part of the strategic interaction that we're really getting at. So let's. So in terms of evaluating projects, and this is the sort of the NRL. You can think about it. The NRL project, the NRL team is one way to think about this. What you want, a good project, right? Should have a high K, so high aid efficiency. For every dollar you spend in that, it should generate lots of influence. It should have low alpha, right? So influence is persistent. The decay of influence is low. So the project, in a sense, you could think of it as having a long-term footprint in a sort of loose sense. Also, you'd like it to have high strategic value, so a high phi, right? High phi. So by putting that project into your basket of projects, generating influence, it diminishes the other country's influence. So that's also effective.
Martin, and then you've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. Okay,
thanks, Bridi. And so the last parameter is this cost effectiveness. I mean, this may be something you don't have direct control over, but that the shadow cost of the project, the lower that is, the higher the level of influence, the steady state level of influence you will have. So in terms of just thinking about, apply this story to the PNG NRL entry. As many of us may know, the Australian government is spending about $600 million to support rugby league in the Pacific, including a team in PNG to enter the NRL competition in 2028. So just thinking about these parameters, the K, the gamma, the phi, and the alpha, as sort of assessing it, well, certainly has high K, right? It's a very visible. Sporting leagues have high visibility. This has extremely high visibility in PNG. Many people are talking about the entry of this team. Also, once established, what about the rate of decay? Well, this is something this team could persist for a long time, right? So the decay may be very low, zero or low or zero alpha. It may not, the effect on influence, the influence that this generates, may not diminish over time. Now, in terms of political cost, well, that potentially in Australia, that could be quite high, if the electorate is not particularly keen on it. And also, in terms of the strategic competition, it is entering into an area that the Chinese can't necessarily match. So that is also effective in the strategic competition sense, although there has been a Chinese response with financial support, I think, as I read it, in Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa for rugby union. So that the Chinese, you can see that strategic interaction, right? They're matching or they're fighting back in a similar domain. Now, just very quickly, I know time is short. What we've seen over time, if we think about, and this is what I'll finish with, in fact, is how is the competition? What sort of aid projects have China and Australia engaged in historically? Well, traditionally they focused in different, if you like, domains. So, China's been very much into infrastructure, ports, buildings, roads, etc. Australia on things like health, education, service delivery. So they were separated, right? So that, in some sense, reduces those coefficients because they're competing in different areas. And in fact, you could think the aid is in some sense complementary, right? The Chinese are building the hospitals, the Australians are training doctors kind of thing. But there has been a recent shift. So Australia has moved in. The competition has become more intense and more direct, I would argue, with Australia shifting into infrastructure. So things that the Chinese had done, and the Chinese pivot for different sorts of small and beautiful projects, climate, community level, climate change reduction, etc., community level type things. So there is some convergence between their aid portfolios. Now, how am I doing for time?
Finishing around about in 30 seconds would be amazing.
Okay. All right, sure. So just as a conclusion, I mean, this work isn't done yet. I do want to have more of an empirical examination of the Pacific aid map and see what else matches up. I think it is an interesting, novel and useful way to think about aid with respect to influence specifically or particularly. I think it has some of the results that come out of the model actually do fit what we observe in this sort of aid competition space. So with that, I will hand back to Bridi and conclude. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin, and perfect timing as well. I know you can't see the crowd, but there was lots of oohs and ahs and people were absolutely glued to your presentation. GD, have we got you online there? We might throw to you next. Welcome. What an amazing background. If I didn't know better, I'd say that background could have been taken in Canberra in autumn, but of course it hasn't been. So GD, over to you. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bridi, and thank you all for having me today, and thanks to the participants. Today, I'm gonna be discussing a very simple and study, a paper, and the question is also very simple, but it's surprisingly underexplored question. We want to see, can foreign aid shape public opinion, specifically in the recipient country where we have a bilateral dispute, and especially in those highly sensitive or maybe zero-sum cases. So going to the question, what we ask in this paper is basically whether information about donors' activities can shape public opinion. But the activities, basically we define it as aid, but later on I will explain what other things it include. And we want to see whether it can shape public opinion in the recipient country, and specifically in the context of a bilateral dispute. We ran a randomized control trial with students in Timor-Leste, where the treatment we assigned is basically information about Indonesian aid. And that includes diplomatic support as well. Our key findings in this paper is that providing aid information increases favorability or favorable attitude towards Indonesia. And it also moderates stances, basically respondents' position on the territorial dispute. So the thing we hear all the time that's very famous, that aid is a kind of instrument of soft power, but in practice most citizens, they don't directly observe the flow. They encounter the information about aid, for example, in lectures, in seminars, in public campaigns, in media, news, and political messaging. So our question becomes here, not just, does aid work as a soft power, but does information about aid act as a persuasive tool to on sensitive issues, such as in this case, this bilateral dispute? I will explain later the dispute. Then existing work, we have some studies. The existing studies, they discuss how aid and information shape attitude. We already know from the existing studies that exposure to information about aid can improve perception of donors and increase ideological alignment. And also we know in some contexts, even there is no effect or negative effect, especially when aid is politicized or misattributed. However, almost to the best of our knowledge, almost none of the literature asks this question, that the question we ask, whether providing or the provision of information about aid can influence preferences over zero-sum bilateral disputes, such as this case. Then the territorial dispute, of course, are notoriously difficult to resolve. In many countries, we have examples, and they involve perception of indivisibility and questions of historical legitimacy and strong symbolic importance, because these issues often revoke national identity and collective memory. Even small disputes can sometimes become politically explosive. So again, we highlight here that our question becomes very important and interesting. Can something like seemingly benign as aid information soften attitude towards bilateral dispute? Then we have examples like aid frequently coexist, with the territorial and political disputes. For example, China, Japan, France, Spain, all have provided aid in a context where dispute exists. So, like, for example, Japan has explicitly used aid in negotiation with Russia over island disputes. But the question is, does providing aid actually shift public opinion in the recipient country in a way that supports diplomatic objectives? And that is something we attempt to do here. So we build our hypothesis very precisely about the questions and about the tests that we do, the information provision or information about aid and diplomatic instances. Specifically, we have a couple of, one instance I will explain later, that is the Indonesian support for they diplomatically supported the East Timor or Timor-Leste to join ASEAN. Those kind of support also we included. So our first hypothesis is basically we hypothesize receiving information about Indonesian aid and diplomatic assistance will increase positive sentiments or attitude toward Indonesia. And number two is receiving aid information will moderate stances on the territorial dispute. And number three, we hypothesize that receiving information on aid and diplomatic assistance will increase perception that the dispute is likely to be resolved. So here you can see the map. Everyone is aware of this, so I skipped the map where we see Indonesia and Timor-Leste. And then about the dispute, I will also show the disputed territory. So Timor-Leste actually gained independence in 2002. However, this colonial border ambiguities they left behind a number of unresolved points. And in many countries, we see those examples. And here, the particular case is this Ikuse. We call it Ikuse, which is covering about 1,500 acre of land. So Indonesia does not provide, of course, about the aid when we speak, it does not provide directly a large financial aid, but it contributes significantly to through provision of training, like public officials. They provide training, they provide scholarships, they provide other technical assistance, and the most important one was the support, diplomatic support to join ASEAN. These are the things that Indonesia is provide. This is the area you see as the disputed territory. This one that's called Ikuse, and this territory is basically 1,500 acres. Then going to the main thing, I will quickly skip those other parts. So what we did, we all know we did randomized control trial with a sample of 217 students from National University, UNTL. And let me go next. This is simple visual for everybody. You can visualize here what we did. So we provided information randomly to this group, the treatment group. However, of course, we know most of the people, they already have information about the territorial dispute, but just in case, we just provided a brief reminder or kind of explanation about the dispute to both groups. But one group received a lecture on the Indonesian aid, and the other group did not receive. And then we provided the survey, and they answered the survey. So the results is quite good, but I'm trying to go to the main, the punchline. What we get here is, maybe I'll skip the numbers and go to the main results. So what we have here, and what we're measuring here, basically, we're measuring, being informed about Indonesian aid, so we see the impact of being informed by the Indonesian aid on different types of attitudes. So one we received, so model one, and maybe here you saw in the table, that's favorability towards Indonesia. And the result shows the aid information significantly increases favorability towards Indonesia. For hypothesis 2, then the aid information also moderates disputes-related preferences. And we have a couple of them here. For example, how much land should Indonesia keep, or how much land should the Timor-Leste keep? And also, should we exchange land? We ask about that. And also, we ask about the escalation. And should we fight? And also, we escalate to the ICJ and give up on land. So we have these related questions to hypothesis 2. And all show that these stances are basically moderate. And then, but for model 4, we don't see any effect. For the hypothesis 3, the treatment basically decreased perceived likelihood of resolution by 10% significance. So the results tell us something quite specific. It is not simply the existence of aid, but how aid is communicated that matters. And even a relatively high informational intervention, a short lecture describing aid and diplomatic support that can shift attitude toward both the donor and the dispute. So the practical implication we thinking of that aid could potentially be used as a persuasive tool to manage bilateral conflicts, and donors who want to reduce audience cost for compromise may need to invest not only in projects but also in transparent, credible ways of informing the public about what they do. So, of course, our study is very simple and very small, and we have some limitations, and we thinking of something in the future too to do. So, of course, number one, our treatment is relatively light, and our sample, which is university students, is not fully representative, and we conveniently chose that sample. And finally, this is just a single case study. So what we think maybe in the future studies or future work should test stronger treatments. Our treatment, maybe it's just information, one small lecture in a room, and it could be something different, maybe stronger. And another thing is to explore the same treatment or a different treatment with a bit representative sample. And also it's better understand scope and conditions. We are also thinking of doing the same study on the Indonesian side, but we didn't determine yet where, and that's quite difficult. Indonesia also very big, so we cannot do it in Java or somewhere. So we were thinking we could do it somewhere in the territory near Timor-Leste. So I think, Bridi, my time is okay?
Absolutely, bang on 15 minutes, GD. Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that's a simple study, and if you have any questions, yeah, feel free to ask. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks, GD. I could see people taking photos of your methodology slides, so hopefully we're going to see a few more studies like this. All right, last but certainly not least, in the room with us, we've got Mark Moran. Over to you, Mark.
Hello. Okay, good. Great to see everyone. It's great so many people are here, and it's really good to see some familiar faces in the room. All right, and I think I'm going to drive this myself. Is that right? But it hasn't come up. Is it on?
Yeah, we're good. You're on.
It's that one? No? Okay. So just I'm going to be talking about Papua New Guinea, and there's just a couple of things I want to highlight about Papua New Guinea. I just really also want to pay my respects to the people in the room who are from Papua New Guinea. And in some respects, I'll be generalising. It's an impossible place to generalise about Papua New Guinea because it's just so diverse in so many different places, and it's just a wonderful country. And I'm still on a steep learning curve after working there for 10 years now. These two things really just, I want to emphasise, the one on the right really is an indication of multidimensional poverty, so which indicates just how high the level of multidimensional poverty is in Papua New Guinea. And the one here shows that using the Gini index, the PNG also has the highest inequality in the region. Okay, so those two things of a high level of poverty, but a very high level of inequality, and it's not an uncommon situation among resource-rich nations elsewhere. All right, so I'm going to kind of gallop through this a little bit because, to an extent, these points have already been made. I'm going to be talking about the tension, I guess, between influence and impact, so diplomacy, influence, and development impact. So, look, the first point is, beyond impact, however that's measured in development circles. The Australian aid program has long acted in the national interest. This isn't a new thing. I remember I was a big part of the Australian aid program in China right through the 90s up to 2005. And we were very precious, I remember at the time, about the extent to which the aid program was being what we saw as instrumentalised for promoting trade into Australia at the time. And recently this has really sharpened because now we have, quite strong policy statements about this. And those of you who were just at the preceding plenary, you heard Penny Morton state that the aid program in PNG has to serve the national interest. So this is it's been around for a long time. If anything, it's sort of more overt, and it's sharpened around geostrategic competition, particularly with China. So in some ways, I think, this is also fair enough because Australia is PNG's largest donor, 600 mil. Previous financial year, just the results just came out last week, 700 mil, roughly are matched by budget support and other money coming in around, supporting things like NRL and defence with the Puk Treaty. So, really, fair enough. It does want visibility in terms of that money and that money that it's putting in. So it does spend a fair amount of time through public diplomacy promoting that work. Development, one of the reasons why development is so useful is it is influential. It's useful. The classic kind of ribbon-cutting ceremonies, photo opportunities and media, it's long been a very effective tool for influence. But only when it works. If it doesn't work, you're not going to be trotting it out for a photo opportunity. Okay, so this thing, development has to work for it to be influential. And the one area where it's just very, very kind of clear cut is infrastructure. When something is built, it's got a high, it's going to be influential. And although Martin, also has an alternative in a way that's competing against China because that was an area that they were investing in infrastructure. But it's also, if you want to pick one aid intervention where you can really get good bang for the bucks from influence, it's infrastructure. And we do see increasing expenditure in infrastructure and also declining expenditure in areas such as health and education. You can look at the Lowy Institute maps for that. That's established. So the other thing that's really important here, we're talking about two very, very different modalities, okay, even though they're intertwined, all right? So achieving development impact, and I think most people in this room are development people, we understand that's through programming, it's long-term, it's transformational, and it accepts transparency as a part of of its modality. Achieving influence involves a very different modality. It's achieved through diplomacy, strategic stakeholder engagement, advocacy, and deal-making, often behind closed doors. So it tends to be reactive and transactional over the short term. There's a bit of a call out to Lucy over here. I read her paper and got very excited and contacted her. People who are, that's an insight from her research. People who are actually academically inclined in doing research in this implementation space, I can tell you it's a lonely place. So it was really great to connect to Lucy. So look, and we also know that we know how to do influence. We're actually doing it well. And I think the example of NRL and Martin was talking about this, and also the other JD, is, we really do know how to grow influence and how to use the development program where necessary to do it, okay? change ambiguity. Okay, so I just want to talk about this. An observation for mine. I mean, I've been working in and across multiple different parts of the aid program. So, I mean, one of the things, like development practitioners themselves, they can really shy away from explicitly pursuing opportunities to grow influence in fear of getting into trouble. Like they don't feel that they're actually authorised to be doing this work. They're also really shy away from their work being instrumentalised, so they're kind of not comfortable in this space. And they're also worried about if they kind of get, start working with political elites, that they're going to get compromised by elite agendas and misappropriation. So there's a bit of a reluctance among development practitioners to engage in this space. But also aid managers also can shy away from this space. They shy away from authorising development practitioners to access political leaders. You often need to get permission or at least consult, and you often are told that you're not allowed to, that's too risky, that political relationship is too sensitive, there's other things going on, so that means it's best that you stay away from that. And, this is something that Heather Murphy has described from the Development Intelligence Lab. This creates a very ambiguous authorising environment. Also, the risks of tackling really complex development problems in like remote areas or public security or exploitive supply chains, there's lots of risky things in Papua New Guinea. These can all be judged too high when weighed against the risks of failure. I mean, failure is really bad for influence, all right? So, and also they can undermine political relationships. So there's a very low tolerance for failure. Now, the public-facing documents, like the flagship Australian PNG DPP, the Development Partnership Plan, can largely be silent on influence and on partner of choice. It's all about development. So that's the flagship document. So this creates confusion. Program reports are prone to omission and periphrasis. That's my new word for the month. Lucy taught me it. Where this kind of woolly wording to sort of hide things. If they do contain political economy or stakeholder analysis, they can be deemed too sensitive for public release. Okay, fair enough. But they can also be rewritten, in which case they lose their meaning, or they're not even shared with implementing and development partners who are within the confidentiality bubble of the aid program. And I can speak from that, from a first-hand experiences, that almost all of my work has not been made public. Okay. Contractors are instructed or reminded informally to win influence during implementation. It's like Penny just did. But this then can lead to the imposter mandates and a little bit of confusion, and objects and scheduling that are not contained within project designs and impact frameworks. And we know that means it's going to have a bit of a bad impact on development impact. All right, so I'm just going to talk here about rural development. Just to illustrate this a little bit. Now, rural development, I'm going to look at it from two different lenses, okay? From an impact lens, from a development lens. So while PNG continues to enjoy economic growth nationally, it's a middle-income country and things are in many ways going well, benefits are not trickled down. There's a very good paper there if you want to get a very definitive source. Inequality is highly spatialised, especially in rural areas. So drivers of fragility, and you can see a list there, remain really very, very high in Papua New Guinea. The Australian government has a long history of supporting rural development. in Papua New Guinea, especially through agriculture, nutrition and food security over 50 years since independence, and even further beyond that if you like to talk to the colonial period. So this is a space that the Australian government and the Australian aid program is quite comfortable and experienced and operating in. There are proven models like WASH, roads, maternal child health, church partnerships and education. We all know these things work, but there's considerable outstanding need. And there are some, just a couple of examples of things that I think have really worked. There's in the community and local governance space, there's been more development planning, participatory budgeting, which has animated social accountability to hold elected leaders to account. And Care International did some really good work in that. And another one, PNG Development Bank operated the Street Pasum store, which provided credit and entrepreneurship training for local stores through the 70s and 90s. And both of those programs were seen as very successful. And it'd be obvious why I've pointed to this one in a moment. So while these past efforts are focused on achieving impact, they have also contributed to or provided pathways to growing influence. All right? So that's we already know that that's what's going on. So if I look at this, now let's just talk about rural development from an influence lens, all right? So much of rural and remote PNG, and I don't mean this isn't all of PNG, but in some of the places I'm most familiar with, and that's where I feel that I have the legitimacy to speak about, which is particularly in Western Province, that it's effectively beyond the limit of the PNG state, where the national government itself has little influence. Meaning you can ask people questions, when was the last time someone from government came here to this village, and you'll be told last year sometime, all right? So this is partly explained by remoteness, inaccessibility, poor economic potential, high costs, etc. But budget allocations are also very low, and too little of that gets past provincial and district centres into rural areas. Agriculture is one example, which is a recent and major priority, but you can see only, just a very small amount of money is actually allocated in the budget for agriculture. Extension work is barely occurring across the country, barely, a hallmark of agriculture. So remote areas are still governed and serviced informally through a patchy mix of community, churches, private sector initiatives and aid programs. It's not like there's nothing out there. But also what's really out there in a big way are these informal mercantile activity, which is, dominated by Asian supply chains, which is largely serving a Chinese consumer market. For example, fisheries and logging. So, and local sentiment is unsurprisingly shifting towards these Asian supply chains in the absence of the state or any other alternative. And that's something that in the villages that I've been to, people have often related to me, you used to come here, talking to me like I'm all of Australia. But we don't really want to we don't want to do business with these Chinese and Asians, but, we don't have a choice. It's all a call to me to do something about that, which of course is beyond my powers to do. But the irony of this to me is a little lost. I mean, there's one thing the development program has been called to act on, which the Development Intelligence Lab's done a really good job of highlighting, is this potential or perceived threat of Australia's security due to China's growing presence. So should this not also be applied to rural areas, this influence lens? Now, this is a complex space, for development program, because it's just so easy to become too influential in the absence of the state, So, the Australian government is sensibly careful about not undermining government and exit strategies and sustainability. Still, you know, when rural development projects do have impact, then they can broaden the base of influence and include citizens and subnational levels of government, as well as servicing Australia's geopolitical interests. All right, so two more slides. Implications, okay? This is, and some of this I think is a bit serious. 1 minute left. Okay, all right. If winning influence is limited to building relationships and doing deals with elites, the numbers of them are in the hundreds. Okay, it's a small number. And, you know, that you really will, the aid program is going to be increasingly transacted in Port Moresby. By prioritising relationships with political and administrative leaders, development programming, it's increasingly managing up. And it's buying into a system that is not, in some cases, is not serving its people, which is obviously diluting development impact. And I think this is the real kicker, you know, that this can potentially, that actually doing this can actually distort national governance, widen fault lines, disincentivise good leadership that serves the people, therefore collectively exacerbating fragility. So hidden objectives, I guess less seriously, more in the development program, hidden objectives, lack of transparency are just going to confuse and overwhelm impact frameworks with a corresponding loss of influence. And I'll just quickly go to the last slide. Sorry, I've gone over. Yeah, so I think maybe just on a positive note, some win-win opportunities for influence and impact. I think partnering opportunities with reform-minded open menders with their discretionary funds that they wield could be explored more actively. Yeah, I think that's definitely a way of then promoting them to be acting in a more socially and democratically accountable way. I think also instead of shying away from some of the more informal political spaces as custom, Wontok networks and patronage networks, these are very powerful drivers in PNG society. They're seen as being corrupt, but they're not necessarily corrupt, or they don't have to be corrupt. And there is a way of engaging with them, but it does need a much more sophisticated approach to thinking and working and politically and risk management. I just want to make a quick call out to international NGOs. I worked at World Vision and during the Make Poverty History campaign. International NGOs know how to do advocacy. They know how to deal with politics. They are one of the most elaborate program logics I've ever read was around that campaign. So there is a lot of expertise that sits within the development community around doing advocacy and managing influence. This is a point that's already been made by others. If influence was defined as an outcome, not hidden, not this ambiguous space, if it was actually a part of the program logics and theories of change, then it could be measured and included into impact frameworks, and the trade-offs and opportunity costs considered. So that's also, I think, a real opportunity. And I guess just to finish up, the greater the impact of development programs, the greater will be their influence. And that, I think, is a bit of a call to action for the development people in the room, is how can we get more on the front foot of this influence game. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Hello. All right. Thank you, Mark. Thank you also to GD and Martin who are online. I'm actually going to go throw straight to the audience. Our panellists in the lead-up were a little bit concerned, in particular, about, I think they describe it as a potential manel. And so I'm actually going to privilege any questions first up from any women in the audience. So over to you. And if not, Lucy, I'm coming at you. Everybody's looking at you, Lucy. I think you just got dobbed in for the first question. We'll take a question from Lucy and then the floor will be open.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your wonderful presentations. This is a question that I grappled with in my practitioner work and now do the same in my research work. Now that's what I spend most of my time doing. So I suppose what I would like to ask, perhaps in relation to the model, the Martin's model, but generally, does it assume that every aid dollar, regardless of motivation, has an influence dividend? And if so, to what extent? Cool. Thank you.
Martin, dive in. Martin, you're on mute.
I started talking and unmuted. I didn't unmute. So thanks for the question, Lucy. The answer to that is that no, it doesn't. Because we're thinking about aggregate influence and aggregate aid. So, you think about those parameters, those Ks, as being like some sort of average of all of the projects you hold. So it's like a weighted average of the projects. So some projects will have very high Ks, some may have zero. So I guess some could potentially be negative too, right? Like there's no restriction on any particular project having that. All projects having some sort of fixed level or so. But the overall thought is that the K represents the average across all projects, or weighted average across all projects.
Thanks, Martin. GD or Mark, did you want to build on that? Agreed. All right. How good is this? Next question. And I think I've got one from Cam Hill. Anybody else? We might take two at a time. All right. Josh, you're next. And then we'll come to James.
Thanks. Thanks to the panel. Martin, just one quick comment and one question. I mean, the comment was thinking about the depreciation value of the NRL team. If that NRL team doesn't win and they feel like they're being dudded by the salary cap, I can guarantee you in a few years they'll be knocking back on Australia's door to help them compete with richer teams in the NRL. So I think there is a depreciation value to that NRL team if it doesn't actually win games. But the more serious question, I guess, is how in your model would you add, I guess, what I see as a basic incentive of local leaders, which is not to be to be influenced by foreign governments? I mean, if you're a local leader, I think the surest way to possibly lose power is to be seen as a tool of a foreign government or easily influenced by one. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Cam. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, and that actually comes a little bit back to Mark's point about reputation, right? Because you think about reputational cost of a product, that may damage your influence, and that feeds in through the gamma parameter. But I mean that's a good question, and that's something that the model is a bit agnostic on that side. On the recipient side, it's agnostic, and that's actually something that could be built. So you have these donors, two competing donors, and a recipient, and the recipient has some behaviour as well, and some objectives. So it's agnostic. It doesn't have a way of analysing that, but I think that's a good idea to actually include that. I think we've talked about Vietnam as an example too, where, they actually strictly coordinate their competing donors, right? So they don't get the Chinese, they wouldn't get the Chinese and Australian both building hospitals or something. They'd get the Chinese building the hospital and the Australians training the doctors or something. There's some coordination. That's another thing that could be added in that way.
Thanks, Martin. We'll go to Josh, then James. We'll come back to the panellists and then come down here.
Thanks for that. Super interesting. I'm really keen to understand, and just keeping this in the sort of supply side of foreign aid and the impact and influence. I'm really keen on your collective thoughts on that from a humanitarian perspective, and why if it holds true, as it seems it has, why there's these huge humanitarian funding shortfalls? It's the cheapest, easiest way to get influence, no?
To James.
Thanks to all three of you for a fascinating and sometimes troubling presentation. And the trouble for me stems to a seeming sort of conflation of influence and competition. And so I guess, so looking at the model in particular, Martin, is there a way that the model could have been constructed so it could be used as a tool for optimization as opposed to competition, for example? Optimization of aid outcomes through collaboration between donors if they're both trying to play the same game. And related to that, a concern I have that the recipient is a passive object in the model. And have you thought about ways to include recipient agency, which I think Cam was sort of touching on a bit as well there, in what you're doing, as well as the influence of other non-aid inputs from donors as well?
When this microphone turns on, I might actually reverse the order. So, Mark, I might come to you if you want to respond on either of these questions, perhaps in terms of James's as well, around are we actually confusing the attempt to influence and assuming that it is all about the competition, for example. DG, I'll come to you, and then Martin, I'll come to you last.
Look, I think, it's great. We're already, to me, we need to have that conversation. I don't know the answer to your question, but I'd like to think about it, and we don't think about it. We don't actually, when we're doing an investment design for a development project, we don't we think about gender, we think about climate change, disaster risk reduction. We have all of these things that we have to think about, but we don't go hard on influence. So, and, if it's going to happen anyway, wouldn't it be better that we actually were on the front foot of it and had that discussion? And if we did that, then I think that, there will be some aid programs where the answer is there's not much that's going to come out of this, but it's worthwhile doing for other reasons. Or there'll be others that will really be very, very high on this kind of influence things. And maybe there's ways we can tweak some things to grow the influence. Because even things that are seemingly may not light up as influence, you're always building relationships. That's always in development. And in those relationships are often connected in ways that are not immediately obvious. So it's not necessarily the open member. And sometimes even women's networks can be incredibly powerful in Papua New Guinea. So there are ways and means of thinking of influence that we just don't really do, that we could do. That's my main comment.
Thanks. GD, over to you.
I think looking at these two questions, specifically on the supply side of the aid, so I guess it's not kind of in my domain to talk about it. I think it's better to skip, but it is also important to me too. When we see the question asked by, I guess, Josh, why we sell, like the aid, and when there is a need for development and everyone knows, so, and we know aid can be used as a good tool to create influence. But sometimes maybe there might be countries, they might have different political objectives. So I think I would keep my perception to me, maybe not publicly open that. But that's a good question. I really want to know the answer if we could have it. Maybe I think Martin would be good to highlight the supply side as well. Thank you, Bridi.
Thanks. And over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Brody, and thanks, Judy. Yeah, so I'll just answer, given that there's been a couple of answers on the first one, I'll just answer the second one, which is a good question. So the influence and the competition. And I guess at the heart of the issue is that you have these two countries that have competing objectives, right? They both have different ideas about what they want their recipient to do. And so that's at the heart of the issue. And so it's difficult to, like we always like to think that we can find a cooperative solution. But given that underlying sort of basis, it's hard to see how you could get the countries to behave differently. So then you sort of give the answer, James, in terms of the recipient having agency. So I think that is something that, it's come up twice now. So it's probably something certainly that I'll be thinking about, is that, the recipient has agency and they can coordinate the donors for better outcomes, so they get, they get some sort of coordination in what they get to improve their outcomes. I think that, my perception, it's always hard to have a complete picture of what's going on, but my perception is that in PNG, for example, the government is active in engaging with donors in this way. But maybe not coordinating. I don't know. Don't know enough about it. But thanks for the question.
It's interesting, panel members. Listening to you speak, it reminds me, frankly, how far this conversation has come, for better or for worse. Like, I have to be really honest. Many years ago, I'm having a lot of trouble here. I heard the term influence. And frankly, that was a dirty word as somebody who cared deeply about development and development impact, right? And then a few years later in my career, maybe a few others, when you have a little bit more experience under your belt, I had a kind of a pragmatic, neutral relationship with the term influence. I was honest about if I was working in a country, I was influencing whether or not a government was going to make a transparency reform. I was, for better or for worse, trying to influence whether or not women would run in Parliament, and influence for a period of time, at least for me, became an honest and neutral term. But then I went back the other way as Australia certainly attempted to launch a soft power review. And at that point where I could see the aid program being embroiled in this quite simplistic view of influence, again, I thought, oh, hang on, I'm not sure if this is going to be a great outcome, not because I don't think Australia should have a positive influence on the world, but if that influence is for such a narrow geostrategic reason, it comes from an assumption that, not my quote, Australia is in a knife fight for influence in the region, then guess what? The confidence that I did not have was that we wouldn't butcher the programs on the ground, right? Because guess what? When you tell your development practitioners go be influential, they don't push back to government and say for whom and for what purpose, because influencing for a long-term development outcome can of course be very, very, very different to the sorts of things that you would do if you're influencing for a community-driven social outcome, etc., etc. So I'm absolutely fascinated at this point in time, because we have got three very different takes on influence. We've now had a couple of serious questions about whether or not we've got it right or wrong, and God only knows where we are and why we're not funding a humanitarian underspend. So let's get this started. I've got two more questions. Hey, look at these questions. All right. I promise to come certainly down here to Alan, and then in the front with the amazing PNG beanie. If you have not seen this beanie, it is something else. So let's go to these two questions. I'm going to ask our panellists to be kind of rapid, and then I'm going to go straight to the back. I saw two hands as well. So over to you, Al.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll try and keep it brief. I'm thinking about, and we've been talking about the agency piece and the recipient's involvement in these, these situations, right? And we're working in the Pacific Islands, the small island states, all of the time. One of the big problems they have is the lack of absorptive capacity And of course, they've got a very weak fiscal position. They have infrastructure deficits. They have lots of reasons to take the money, right? So no one's going to say no to the money. As you get more competition, and I think Martin's presentation showed it very well, you know, the water level in the bath going up, there's more money coming in, there's more activity going on. The reality is, particularly the people in the governments are very, very few. If you go to places like Cook Islands, Tuvalu, all these places, they have very, very few people to handle all of this. So they're saying yes for a lot of reasons. You know, and there's many, many reasons why they'll say yes and they won't say no. But as the amount of competition goes up, the amount of money that's coming in goes up, their focus and their ability to manage their own countries long term becomes diluted because they're busy running around trying to satisfy the needs of all these donors who are queuing up to influence them. So I'd like to get some opinions on that because we see it every day and the tempo's going up.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So, my name is Kevin. I'm a frontline advocate for social inclusion in PNG, human rights advocate. My question is around prioritization. And firstly, I, for one, agree that the inequality gap in PNG continues to widen. The level of corruption in government is very high. We are not seeing development despite the many resources, natural resources that we have. And that's the fact. My question is around prioritizing donor influence. For some of us, we disagree with this NRL concept. Like, seriously, is that priority to get an NRL for DFED to support an NRL team? Or why not we look at supporting downstream processing? Like, we have natural resources in our country that needs a lot of downstreaming processing in country. So looking at the donor influence, and where is that priority for aid to come in? And people like myself and other colleagues who advocate against corruption and we advocate for good governance, we see that as we speak, there's a great influence where the Chinese government and the Asian governments are going right into the communities in the village. They are targeting their approaches in the SME sector, economic empowerment for the little people. That's where they are trying to influence at that very low community level and coming up. And Mark, I agree with you. I've worked with World Vision in Western Province. That's a very isolated province. And if DFAT was, or AUSAID or Chinese aid was to prioritize their funding in terms of influence, then would the panel agree that the concept of an NRL team is the way forward to have influence, or would we look at other priorities such as supporting downstream processing so that we have a long-term sustainable impact in terms of influence? Thank you.
Okay, super questions. So we have, is the strategic competition for influence making our partners too busy serving the competition rather than getting on and running their countries? And frankly, NRL, good or bad? It's going to be a lightning round because I want to get to more questions. Martin, I am going to come straight to you. GD, I don't know if you have opinions on rugby, but dive in if you do. And then back to Mark. And then I think we've got Lisa and a couple up the back.
So I think that's a really good statement, Bridi, that, like maybe as the competition heats up, you tend to, I think, so what I'd say is there's been like a diversification of the aid portfolio for Australia going from sort of institution building to now to infrastructure, and the Chinese too, they're spreading out. So that could be a sign of sort of wanting to be more competitive. You compete on more margins. You don't let the other side get away with a freebie in any area. And then that diversification may diminish the development value of your aid dollar, if you like. You're spending more to sort of maintain influence. And in the NRL, I mean, it's actually a clever move, I think, in terms of influence building, because it's something that the Chinese can't offer. They can't offer membership to a rugby league team in their country. So that's, but then the Chinese counter, right, by supporting unions. So, you can see that competition.
All right, GD, I'm taking you as a pass unless you appear. Mark, back to you. That's a rugby pass.
All right. Yeah, look, I mean, yes. I mean, that's absolutely happening. And I think we need to have that, that needs to be spoken about. But I think for me the biggest concern is that it almost legitimates the elite game, because the deals are being done in the capital cities, and it just sort of takes the main game for the national government should be serving its people, So that's my response to that. And thank you very much, and we'll talk after this as well. But look, I'm a big fan of downstream processing, mate. I mean, look, fisheries, agriculture, mining, a lot of it should be happening in PNG and at a subnational level as well. But if you ask me about the NRL, I actually do. In a way, I'm like, okay, if we've got to influence, that's good bang for the bucks, in terms of giving influence. And if it was a way that would take some of the heat off the development part of the program, so it could be looking more at processing, then I am actually in favour. Because I do think it will be very influential.
All right, we might go to Lisa and then RTI up the back. I think that these will be our last two questions.
Thanks very much. I'll keep it short. Mark, I had a question for you about whether there might be a time dimension that's missing from your model. So completely agree that long-term development outcomes are... But my sense is that long-term development outcomes, take a long time, and the people who want influence want it now. And so is there a way that development delivers influence now that doesn't undermine good development practice?
I can't say it any better. That was literally my question. So I'll give an anecdote, though, because I wanted to kind of put some context to it for PNG. As an implementer for the USAID PEP program, we experienced that. On the USAID program, we're working with off-grid companies to deploy solar home systems, but working from a private sector lens. So trying to get solar home systems out into these communities through the local private sector. And at the same time, other donors, who I won't mention who they are, were bringing in solar home systems into those same communities below market rates. And so to Lisa's point, this question of persistent and quality impact and what that means for the long term versus the short run. So the donor that was bringing in stuff at lower than market rates, they were getting quick wins, they were getting great stories, influence in the moment, but undermining the market for the long run. So could you talk about that temporal aspect?
Without a doubt, it's negative, So, I mean, it is development projects are operating typically 5 years. They are long-term. They're transformational. One thing leads to another. They've got a program logic and a theory of change. And then this transactional stuff comes in. It's disruptive. My only thing is, if it's going to happen, then maybe there's a way that we can plan for it, So instead of it never being discussed or never made visible, or just you're gonna get a bang on the door and everyone just drop everything because we've got to do this thing. is I don't know, maybe there's a way that you, in the design, you sort of prepare for that, or you have somebody, at least you have someone who's responsible for it, or maybe you set aside some funds for it, or something. So, that's my only answer to that. But the answer to both of your questions is it is fundamentally disruptive. We're talking about two different modalities that have got totally different ways of working that are smashing together in a hidden way. So if they're going to smash together, if that's inevitable, let's not make it in a hidden way. At least we have control over that. Thanks.
Super. GD, we'll come to you next for final remarks.
Thank you very much, Bridi. And I have a sense, before joining academia, I was working in international development organizations, and I'm coming to this concern and kind of question raised by Kevin. He said something about, development objectives and the competition for influence. So I have, and as a practitioner, I have noticed those things. So when we were working on some projects, of course, the organizations, we needed money, but the donors, their area of, where they wanted to give aid, that was totally different. So, for example, people really needed support for example, education. But here, the objective was kind of like a very narrow, small type of capacity building training to, let's say, local communities. Or maybe there was a need for hybrid or new variety of seed to farmers, but they were focusing more on provision of information. So this kind of thing, of course, there was this misalignment, and that exists. I hope, along with the influence objectives, donors can also, somehow look into those development priorities. I think that's just my comment. Thank you very much, Bridi, and thanks to all of you.
And Martin.
Thank you, Bridi. Yeah, I don't have a lot to say in conclusion. Just thanks to the organisers and also to the audience for such excellent questions. Definitely more to think about for me. And thank you.
With that, as we've been speaking today, I thought of three things that have come up of late. So if you're into recommended readings, I thought that I would mention them here. The first is that we have been hearing, and in fact it was mentioned by Bill Costello from DFAT in a previous panel today, around an attempt for DFAT to actually put some MEL on relationships and actually how it is that you may measure the value of a relationship. So those of you working in MEL, perhaps on that G2G program, et cetera, this is a call out for you to be on this panel next year at the AAC, but also connect with your MEL friends if you are also looking to do what Mark is asking us to do in measuring and putting some metrics around this. The second, for those of you who are also interested in how other donors are going, USAID, RIP, did actually release, get this, I can't believe it was called this, they did it, it's called the Countering Chinese Influence Strategy with Your Aid Program or something along those lines. It is, I kid you not, it is Googleable. Here's the thing though, it actually subscribes to the thesis that if you go out looking to influence for influence's sake, it will not work. But it did, for better or for worse, articulate the 4 threats to development that China posed in their opinion, and it set out how a development program can advance things like gender equality, democracy, and all those other things that have been lost since. However, as a document, it's kind of an interesting, curious framework. A little bit strange as well, but worth a look. And then thirdly, on the question about, and I think the interesting points being made around, for example, NRL, which of course is not much ODA funded, it is beyond that, versus a development program funded funding and what the development program funding should be set up to do. There is some interesting data that has been put together by William Lieben from the lab, actually tracking the fact that Australia expenditure is almost missing a budget in some way, shape or form. And there is, I think, a building sense of community really asking the question about whether or not aid money should be used for the influence game, or there is another budget that is missing in Australia's portfolio in a country that has spent 9% on its international affairs for the last quarter century. That amount total has not shifted. So I think this is a conversation that has come so far and no doubt will continue to mature. And so please join me in thanking these courageous people for sharing their ideas.